Jake Berry. We're going to do some politics as well, but we're going to start off by, in the theme of this series of interviews, the real me. Can I start by asking you about losing your brother?
Well, it was a tragedy. He was 47 years old when he died. And the real tragedy for me and our family and his children is that it was all just completely avoidable. He came to stay with me at home in Lancashire. And I noticed, because he kept waking me up actually, that he kept getting up and having a pee in the middle of the night. And I sort of said, what's the matter with you, Max? Why? You're 47, not 87. Why do you keep, or 45 as he was then, why do you keep? And he said, I've just got this real problem that I need to keep going to pee. And I said to Mia, you really, really should go and see the doctor about that. That's not normal. And he did go and see his GP, and they misdiagnosed, sadly, what they call prostatitis. And he had course after course of antibiotics. And when he'd been at this, because he didn't live near to me, but when he'd been at it for a few months, I said to him, I think you might have prostate cancer. Go and get your PSA checked, because working in Parliament, as you know, we have the annual sort of focus on prostate cancer and prostate cancer awareness. And he was very, very reluctant to do that. And sadly, when he did get round to doing it, and it's a really important message for men actually, when he did get round to doing it, the cancer he had, which had started out as very minor but aggressive, had spread to his lungs, and he also had bone cancer as well. And then it stopped being a conversation about, let's get the prostate cancer and cure it, which you can effectively almost do now if you get it early, to how we can extend your life. And what's so tragic is I remember talking to him repeatedly, and his ambition for extending his life sort of went from, I'd like to be here for my daughter's 18th birthday to I'd like to be here to see her get her GCSE results, or I'd like to see her 14th birthday, and it just kept coming back and back. And he died relatively quickly, and it just felt completely unnecessary. I was a minister at the time in Levelling Up, and I remember my phone ringing and him saying, this is the last time you'll ever speak to me, because I'm in hospital in Birmingham and the doctors have said that I'm going to die in the next 2 hours. And so I just walked straight out, got in my car, picked my sister up, who works in London, and my wife, and drove to see him in the hospital. And he was alive when we got there. So we got him home, and then I sort of cared for him that evening and into the next day. And that time that we spent together is just so precious to me. I remember as we were driving home, I said, look, what do you want? And he said, get me a bottle of Jameson's whiskey and a packet of cigarettes. And he'd given up smoking years ago. And late that first night, he sort of said, right, I'd like to have a cigarette, and I think I'll have a glass of whiskey. And he turned around to his wife and said, yeah, can I have it in one of those crystal glasses we've got? And she said, well, they're for best. And he said, this will be the last glass of whiskey I ever have. I'm dying. And you just say these inappropriate things that you can look back and laugh at. And the real thing for me was, so he couldn't walk, so I pushed him outside, and he sat there, and he couldn't even drink the whiskey, but he sat there and smoked a cigarette. And I had a conversation with him, and I said, the question I was desperate to ask him, I said, are you scared? And he said, no, I'm not. He said, absolutely not. But at the same time, there's that great disappointment. You can't help but thinking if he'd got that early diagnosis, it would have been a different story. And I'd say to, anyone watching this tonight, if you're a bloke and you get sort of problems with your waterworks or anything like that, is just go and see a GP.
You've given that message really, really powerfully. Thank you. Obviously sorry that you had to give that message. Obviously, this had an effect on you. I read an interview in which you said, I finally admitted to my wife I was struggling with dark thoughts and anxiety. Can you describe the nature of the dark thoughts?
When I was at university, I did have a period of time where I struggled quite badly with depression, and that I'd sort of got that sorted when I was in my early 20s, and had always been fine with it. But I had a succession of challenges. I stopped being my brother died, and then shortly thereafter I gave up the job I loved, which was Northern Powerhouse Minister, and then my mother died very shortly after that. And I think the culmination of those events sort of made it really hard just to cope with the day-to-day. And, again, it is, when you face that and the challenge that depression and mental health issues in general can bring, the thing to do is to talk to the nearest and dearest around you. And in a way, it can be a bit of an explanation for, where was that person, Jake Berry? Where's he gone? That father who, was always present in the room, but now sits there looking at his phone and goes to bed early. Where's that person gone? And it's only the point at which you sort of sit down and say, actually, I do think I've got an issue with this. I think I should, seek a remedy, whether that's talking to people or whether it's medication, that you can start to make that journey back to the person that you were. And funny enough, because we all think that when we suffer alone, that was the point where my wife also said to me how badly she'd been struggling with postnatal depression. She'd just had our third child, so she'd done really well. We'd had 3 children in quick succession. We'd gone through together all of those problems around the loss of my brother, who she was very close to as well, and my mother. And also politics is kind of a bit of a family business, because you're both in it together, really. You can't be an MP without the support of your other half. So we've been through a really tough time. And when I sort of talked to her and said, look, I really think that I'm just not happy with the person I am anymore, because I've lost me somewhere in this great sort of battle of politics and the turbulence of life and having children. I've lost me somewhere. And I know that she felt similar, and it was just good to be able to talk to each other about it. I think in truth, the challenges she faced with postnatal depression, which is sort of medically driven. I mean, all problems with mental health are, but very sort of strongly medically driven by, having had a baby and that hormone crash that can happen afterwards. I think she faced great challenges and dealt with them very bravely. And the more we talk about it, I guess the more able other people feel to come forward and talk about it. But you get some really dark days, but I guess the key message is, whether you're a man or a woman, it's just don't suffer alone, talk to people, but also there is a bright sunny day on the other side, and you come out of it.
And I'm not going to ask about your wife, because that's her story. But if you would like to tell me how you dealt with your depression, then this is your moment. Equally, if you don't want to tell me that, then it is personal to you and there is no pressure.
So I think the biggest challenge I had was saying that I had a problem, and I didn't seek any formal help, because actually almost admitting it didn't make it better, but almost admitting it made it manageable. And it's something, having dealt with it in my late teens, early 20s, it's something I knew would pass. And I think that also gave me hope and the ability to deal with it.
And I guess you suffered with depression at university. You suffered with it again a few years ago. Just as the positive side of that is that it passed both times. Do you think, but it could come back?
Of course it can do. I don't think it can come back. I think it will come back. But I go back to that sort of dealing with it historically makes you more able to deal with it in the future. And, I think we'll be ready for it. The one thing I've learned is that, don't suffer in silence, talk to other people, and you will be amazed. You definitely won't be the only person who's had that experience, and you may free and enable other people to talk about it. It's
incredibly powerful to hear you talk so openly in that way. Thank you. Gosh, I do want to, I've got a bit of politics for you, but thank you.
We'll get there eventually.
Thank you. You have been subject to awful harassment by a constituent. You told me before we came on air, have suffered from a stalker too. Just tell us a little bit about those cases, it sounds frightening. Was it frightening?
The issue he came to see me about, I got him tens of thousands of pounds worth of compensation. And I thought, I would almost be a hero to this guy. I went to see my MP. My MP did his job of helping me as a constituent. And that rapidly escalated into quite a sustained campaign of threats of violence and intimidation. I remember one day going to the Costa Coffee at a local retail park in my constituency, and he came over to speak to me and said, why won't you respond to my emails anymore? And I said to him, I was with a couple of my kids and my wife, and I said, I'll do a deal with you. You stop threatening to kill me and I'll start responding to your emails. And he said, well, they're not those type of death threats. I said, well, how many types are there? You're going to threaten to kill me or you don't? I also had another stalker who sort of bizarrely checked into a hotel in my constituency.
A woman?
It was a lady, who claimed to work for me. And the first I knew about it was New Year's Day. And the hotel phoned me up and said, we have this lady staying here. You need to come and pay her hotel bill. And I said, well, I really have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know who this is. I don't have anyone working for me with that name. And they'd been staying there for, I think, half a dozen nights and I'd run up this huge hotel bill. And I said to the manager, well, what should I do about this bill? I said, well, I suggest you do what I'm going to do. I'm going to phone the police. And that individual who was from the northeast of England who travelled down to Lancashire then had a sort of fixation, claimed that she was having my baby, claimed that we were getting married, did a YouTube channel about maternity and wedding wear, came to our lane to our house, was sort of at the end of the lane with a suitcase waiting to run away with me or whatever she had in her mind.
You're speaking so openly. It's hard to move on a genuine, straightforward political question, but under Liz Truss's premiership, brief premiership, you are party chairman. You're right at the centre of it. You're there right until the end when you leave, when she leaves office. Can you tell me anything about those last few days? Yeah,
so party chairman is a very, very personal appointment for the Prime Minister. You normally come in and out with them. Sometimes they change them halfway through the premiership, but it's a very tight relationship. If you're going to be Prime Minister of this country, the three crucial jobs are your chairman, your PPS, which is sort of your Prime Minister's assistant who talks the backbenchers for you, and your chief whip. And that really is the group who are very close and tight with the Prime Minister. Right, and I went to see her on that Sunday morning and sort of really set out to her that I thought, following the mini budget, and we had real problems with colleagues, and part of my job is to be that truth teller, if you like, to go in and say, no matter how many people are stood around you saying it'll be all right, or, we can get through this unless things change, then you won't. When she asked me to effectively stand up a war room, if you like, in number 10, starting on the Monday morning. So we stood up that war room, and effectively all decisions that were made came through that group, which was me, the Prime Minister, the Chief Whip and the Deputy Prime Minister. And I can recall before the Prime Minister's questions on that Wednesday, there was a big debate about whether we would honour the triple lock to pensioners. And there was a lot of pushback from the Treasury, not wanting to make the commitment. I actually think the commitment always would have been made, but it was a timing thing. And, which not to do the triple lock and not to uprate benefits by inflation would have taken legislation through the House of Commons. And I said to the people in the Treasury, I said, you all work in the Treasury, but trust me, you need to learn how to count. There is no majority in Parliament to not uprate pensioner benefits, pensions, and other disability benefits and out of work benefits. And that decision was made, and then the Prime Minister Liz Truss announced at Prime Minister's questions that was going to take place. So it was a fascinating moment to be able to sort of pull all the strings of government to try and point it in the direction of the government continuing in a real privilege. On the next day, the Prime Minister did resign, but before that happened, which I just found extraordinary. I was actually speaking to the local government association in central London. I was pulled away from that to go into the Treasury. And I arrived at the Treasury to talk to Jeremy Hunt, who economically and quite rightly was concerned about the instability for the economy, about losing a prime minister and how that prime minister would and could be replaced. What I found just extraordinary, and maybe I should have expected it, is when I arrived at the meeting to talk to him, there were two most senior civil servants in the Treasury who spent 15 minutes sort of talking to me about why there could be no long protracted leadership election in the Conservative Party. And they asked me at the end of it, well, do you agree? And I said, well, I hope you don't mind me saying I don't really think it's any of your business about how political parties, as civil servants, I don't think it's any of your business about how political parties choose their leader. That's a matter for political parties. But I did speak to Jeremy, and we very quickly worked out that it was possible, if it came to it, to have a leadership election in 2 or 3 days that would engage the membership of the Conservative Party in the vote. I actually think it's a great pity for Rishi Sunak that we didn't have a vote of members, because in the summer, fine Conservative that he is, he struggled actually to get the support of Conservative Party members, as funnily enough did Jeremy Hunt in the previous leadership election. And I think even though he absolutely got the majority of members of Parliament, the Conservative members of Parliament, and I support him as Prime Minister and everything he does, there is a challenge he has, is even if it's not true, there's a perception of the Conservative Parliamentary Party now being disconnected from our membership because we didn't have that, even if it was a sort of endorsement vote for Rishi, which I'm sure, if he'd have asked Conservative members to endorse him, he would have won it well. And I do think if you look at some of the political manoeuvrings that are going on with the Truss and Priti Patel movement for members, and some of the other things that are sort of the wider sort of anger and disengagement amongst the Conservative membership about having been denied that vote, I think, it would have been better for all concerned, actually, if even an endorsement vote had taken place. That
was a remarkable interview. Thank you for giving us those political insights at the end. But the powerful messages on prostate cancer and depression, they are the standout for me.
Are we done? I've only just started. What about the Lord Powers Minister?
Do you know, we might need to do a part 2, Jake Berry, because I could have...
Part 2.
Jake Berry, thank you.